Czechast, a podcast in English about Czech and Moravian society, history, culture and economy.
Hello and welcome to Czechast, the podcast in English about all things Czech. I'm Vít Pohanka. Amnesty International has just published its latest annual report, and when it comes to Czechia, the picture it paints is not entirely positive. Now, as often happens in interviews like this, when I spoke to Amnesty International Czechia spokesperson Martina Nejedlá, we ended up talking for much longer than would fit into a regular radio broadcast. So in this episode, you'll hear the full version of our conversation. And perhaps one more thing. Here on Czechast, I often try to highlight what's inspiring or worth celebrating about Czechia. But that also means it's important not to look away from the less comfortable parts of the story. I think reports like this may not always paint an ideal picture, but they can definitely be a useful mirror and a starting point for a broader conversation about where the country is heading when it comes to human rights. So, here is my full interview with Martina Nejedlá of Amnesty International Czech Republic.
Czechast, a podcast in English about all things Czech. Whether you're an English-speaking expat living in Czechia and Slovakia, or a descendant of the Czechs, Moravians and Slovaks who left for a better life in America, Australia, Britain or Canada so long ago that you don't speak the language of the old country, this podcast in English is for you.
When we look at the discrimination of Roma, respectively like segregation of Roma children in Czech schools, the study says that we still have more than 130 primary schools which are still segregated. But on the other hand, in November, the authorities introduced a new plan which should support the desegregation of Roma children and prevent from their placement in special schools only because of their ethnicity or social disadvantage. But as I know, I'm with Amnesty from 2012, and it was the main issue we were focusing these years, 2012-13, we had big researches about this school system and segregation of Roma. And it's a little bit sad that we still, in 2026 or 25, we still have to speak about this trouble. And 130 segregated schools in the Czech Republic, it's still a lot, I guess.
The report also looks at Ukrainian refugees. Czechia was initially very welcoming. It provided hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians a safe haven. So what has changed?
It depends. That we know that at the beginning of the war, or when the people started to come to Czech Republic, like the state was kind of relatively welcoming. People got the access to temporary protection and the protection of the state. But now we can see that there are some growing challenges in integration of these people. For example, in access to housing, education, or stable employment. And as well, unfortunately, xenophobic attitudes and even attacks. So the issue today, I guess, is less about protection itself and more about ensuring kind of a long-term equal living conditions. And it's important what to say is that we know from the report from the Ministry of Interior that we have political figures and other people who promoted disinformation and even hostility towards Ukrainians. I think it's really terrifying and it can be really dangerous in our other and future integration of these people. Because from the last news, we know that we have in Czech Republic almost 400,000 Ukrainian refugees.
You know, I wonder How much of a role does political rhetoric play here? Obviously, we've got Freedom and Direct Democracy Party in the government now, which is openly anti-immigrant and quite hostile to Ukrainians as well. And I suppose my question is, are politicians rather reflecting public attitudes, or are they shaping them?
I'm afraid that these politicians and these parties and their representatives make it. I don't believe, and we know maybe from some researches, that people are kind of open, kind of welcoming. Of course, maybe not the voters of these parties you mentioned, or their voters probably have these attitudes and opinions, but they are not the majority of the Czech society. And this rhetoric from politicians, from these high-positioned politicians, is very dangerous because it can affect the public opinion and also the mood in the society. That's why, from Amnesty point of view, this is very dangerous, that politicians bring these topics to the society in this, like a disinformative way, kind of, because we can really see that these are very often lies and also like facts which are just bent to their point of view. So if this remains in society and their rhetoric, and if they use their power and their position to spread this disinformation and this false information, let's say, that's dangerous and it shouldn't happen.
Another issue that Amnesty raises is arms exports. Why is this such a concern in the case of Czechia?
In this year, or in 2025, we speak mainly about transfers to Israel, because it's clear that in Israel it can be very easily abused against human rights, against Palestinian civilians, and this is very, very irresponsible from the Czech state. And from our point of view, it's against the arms trade treaty we are part. So it's kind of illegal. And we in Amnesty call to all states to stop transferring arms to Israel, because it's really dangerous and it can cause many human rights abuses, as we can see since many years.
Obviously, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Ministry of Trade and Industry, if I'm not mistaken, are responsible to issue the licenses for such exports. I wonder whether you can engage with them and whether they listen to you.
We have had many meetings with Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Ministry of Trade and Industry, which are responsible for the transfers. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs has the last word to allow, because this is the ministry which should guarantee that it doesn't go to the states we were talking about. In our advocacy talks and pressure, this is, I don't want to say priority, but this is really what we do and what we monitor well. I am not sure about the legal steps. We still try to persuade or maybe explain to the representatives of these ministries and of the state why this is not good, why this can be illegal, and that they should guard these transfers more responsibly and better. But still, we haven't reached a lot yet. Even if 5 years ago we were successful that their annual report about arms transfers was open to public, because before it was even just secret and nobody could see it. But still now, even if you can read it and see some numbers and like a percentage of the arm transfers, it has some secret sites and like confidential numbers. They don't even tell to journalists, and that's why this is not transparent, and this looks like they hide something.
How is your communication with the present government? And I'm asking because Foreign Minister Petr Matsinka, with whom I suppose you would need to get in touch, is, to put it mildly, not a big friend of non-governmental organizations such as yours.
The former minister, even if we have never agreed with this, his or the administrative attitude towards Israel, we found some points we agreed, and we could have a normal debate or discussion, and we could have showed some points of view from our side, and he was willing to listen and to have a debate with us. Nowadays, with Petr Matsinka, you mentioned, we asked for a meeting several times. We have not received any response yet. So I am afraid that he will be the one that he would not like to speak with, not even with us, but maybe with other representatives of civil society in general. And it's an alarm, I can say.
Finally, let me ask you about climate, because the report also highlights climate policy. Why does Amnesty International see this as a human rights issue, particularly in Czechia?
We still comment the more or less same topics or same problems. But unfortunately, this year or in 2025, we have a kind of big paragraph about the right to a healthy environment, which means that with this climate crisis we all face, it's now important to adopt a framework climate law, and Czech government has not done this yet. And with the new government, we know that their steps can be even worse, because they promoted like less environmental protection and stricter regulations. And as we can see, even in this few months, that the policy in this field doesn't have enough attention of the government. Even more, they promoted some steps forward, let's say. And I think from this point of view and from a human rights point of view, it can be very, very dangerous. And as a civil society, we should make some pressure to these politicians and the government not to leave us without the climate law, without leaving fossil fuels and emissions with no regulation, because this is very important for the future of Czech Republic and also of the whole planet, as we all know. But Czech Republic and its government kind of states that this is not important issue, and this can be very tricky and dangerous for the whole society and for the whole future, I'm afraid.
This was Martina Nejedlá from Amnesty International Czechia. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this or any other episode, please don't forget to follow Czechast on your favorite podcast platform, and feel free to share it with your friends or colleagues who might be interested. It really helps me to spread the word and prepare more stories and interviews like these. Thanks again for listening. Stay safe, stay healthy, stay curious, and as we say in Czech, naslyšenou.
Czechast, a podcast in English about all things Czech. Whether you're an English-speaking expat living in Czechia and Slovakia, or a descendant of the Czechs, Moravians and Slovaks who left for a better life in America, Australia, Britain or Canada so long ago that you don't speak the language of the old country, this podcast in English is for you.